When the blood of the Emperor has been spilled and the dragon fires turn cold. When Oblivion itself infects the royal ruby land and all hope is lost. The people need a symbol of hope, a protector to shield the innocent, and a slayer to kill the wicked and demonic, and to keep killing. And what better symbol, what better legend to assume the mantle of than the Star-Made Knight himself, the glorious one, the legendary demigod hero, Pelinal Whitestrake. Hello my fellow hirelings of House Telvanni, I'm Cyrodiil Neloth, and allow me to introduce to you the Divine Crusader, a holy knight dedicated to the teachings of the 9 divines and protecting the holy land of Cyrodiil, who the gods themselves chose as their champion, as their Divine Crusader. This build is basically the ultimate tank that can stand against any enemy from Cyrodiil to the Deadlands to the Shivering Isles, and can deal enough damage to make Umaril the Unfeathered quake in his boots, or talons, I guess. This build is perfect for those who are new to Oblivion and perhaps have only ever played Skyrim, and want to dive into the game without having an abundance of knowledge on the inner game mechanics. So without further ado, let us look at how to create the Divine Crusader. Now, when we wake up in the Imperial City prison, dazed and confused, we will need to select not only a race, but also a background, which is a new feature in the Oblivion Remaster that replaces how gender affected stats with now backgrounds affecting stats, which I personally think is a cool feature and hope they will include in the Elder Scrolls 6 to enhance role-playing. Now, unlike Skyrim, selecting a race is a bit more important. Not too important, mind you, but enough so that it does give you a slight statistical advantage at the beginning of the game. There are 2 choices for the race that I believe offer good starting bonuses as well as fit into the theme of this build. The first that I would highly recommend for beginners would be a Nord with the Western background. Western Nords start out with high strength and endurance, which is good as those are the 2 core attributes we will want to focus on leveling first. And they also have bonuses to the skills Armorer, Blade, Block, Blunt, Heavy Armor, and Restoration, all of which we will be prioritizing when we make our class. The second race I would recommend, which admittedly fits the theme of the Divine Crusader a bit more from a role-playing perspective, would be an Imperial with the Colovian background. Their stats are still good, mind you, for a sword and board knight, but simply not as good as a Western Nord. However, the plus side is that they start with high personality and also bonuses to the mercantile and speech skill, which will allow us to get better prices at stores and make friends quicker, which can be very useful bonuses at the start of the game. Keep in mind that while a Colovian Imperial is more fitting thematically, a Western Nord still fits perfectly well, as Colovian Imperials are sometimes referred to as Cyro-Nords in the lore, showing that the 2 races are more closely tied than you might think. After meeting Emperor Uriel Septim and traversing the caves that run alongside the prison, our Emperor will pop the question and ask us what our birth sign is. And there are 2 birth signs that I think would work very well for the Divine Crusader build. The best birth sign, I believe, would be the Lordstone. Now, in original Oblivion, the Lordstone was one of the worst birth signs in the game, granting you the power to regenerate health quicker at the cost of 50 magicka, but also giving you a permanent 25% weakness to fire. To put it simply, the disadvantages outweighed the advantages by a lot, especially towards the mid to late game. However, now the Lordstone has been altered to give 2 permanent bonuses, plus 15 armor rating and plus 15 magic resistance. Now, the armor rating is actually quite nice, as unlike Skyrim where the max armor rating is 567, Oblivion's armor rating is capped at 85. The magic resistance is also quite nice since we will be facing many magic users. Again, this build is supposed to be very tanky, so these flat bonuses will be very useful at every stage of the game. The second Birthsign I would recommend would be the Warrior, which grants us a bonus of 10 points to both Strength and Endurance. This will be very nice at the early stage of the game, since Strength and Endurance will be our bread and butter, since we will want to be leveling them up like no one's business. But later in the game, you'd hardly remember you had it in the first place. And since the Oblivion Remaster makes health added by Endurance increase retroactively, you aren't pressured to have Endurance be as high as possible in the early game. Both are really fitting from a gameplay and lore perspective, so simply take your pick, but I would recommend the Lord Stone more. After following the Emperor and his blades for a bit like a dog, the Emperor gets a close shave, and one of the blades, Boris, will ask us what our class is. Now, in Oblivion, we will have 21 classes to choose from. However, it is always recommended that you create your own class to ensure that you have all the skills you really want, as many classes will include some that you really just don't need. For this build, we will want to create a unique class and choose the combat specialization, as the majority of our skills will be focusing on, well, combat. For attributes, we will want to select Strength and Endurance for our two favored attributes, as those are the two we will want to max to 100 first. We will want to select the skills Armorer, Blade, Block, Blunt, Heavy Armor, Destruction, and Restoration. Now, typically in builds, you only want to select one weapon type, but since the Divine Crusader has access to a unique sword and mace that were both used by Pelinal Whitestrake himself, I wanted to use both and swap to one or the other every once in a while to keep the game more interesting and fresh. But if you want to focus on only one weapon type, you can easily swap out the lesser one for Mercantile so you can get better prices at stores, or even Archery to use bows better. Block will be needed so that you can absorb high amounts of damage, which will be really nice when fighting higher level Daedra like Daedra. Heavy armor is obvious as we will be wearing it, and we will want to work on making sure it degrades slower and slower when in combat. Keep in mind that there is a light version of the Divine Crusader armor identical to the heavy armor version, so you can go into light armor and be fine. But heavy armor is just more fitting for this character. Now, Destruction will come in handy because it will allow us to do damage in between our swings, allowing us to boost our DPS and dish out an incredible amount of damage on our foes. The same goes with Restoration. It will be very useful to keep us from dying if we get low on health, and so we don't have to solely rely on health potions we either find in the world or make ourselves. Magic is more utility for this build and not the sole focus, so don't feel pressure to use it all the time, though Destruction is really fun to use. When you make your selections, you will want to name your class the Divine Crusader, or whatever you want, and then go forth into the lands of Cyrodiil and Oblivion. Now, when it comes to the weapons in the early game, you will want to choose between either Blades or Blunt, and then stick with it for a large portion of the game until you get the Divine Crusader equipment. I would recommend Blades at the beginning, as we can easily come across a steel short sword and an iron longsword in the tutorial. But there is also an iron warhammer in the tutorial as well, so it's whatever you desire. Pretty much use whatever weapons until you come across the sword and mace of the Crusader, which will then be your default weapons for the rest of the game. Now, we won't be using mysticism spells and soul-trapping creatures to recharge our weapons, but there is a technique I will talk about later that will allow us to recharge the Crusader weapons for free. Speaking of enchantments, the Sword of the Crusader deals fire damage and also magicka damage, which is perfect against mages and other spell-casting creatures. And the Mace of the Crusader does fire damage as well, but also turns the undead up to certain levels, which is also nice. For armor, you will want to wear whatever armor you come across until you acquire all the pieces of the Crusader armor, which, congratulations, will be the armor you wear for the rest of the game. Now, each piece of armor has an assortment of enchantments, but together they will increase your health, allow you to resist damage inflicted with normal unenchanted weapons, resist disease up to 100%, rendering you immune to disease in general, Fortify both Restoration and Destruction, allowing you to use spells in those fields more effectively. And lastly, fortify your personality, which isn't necessary for this build and playstyle, but still nice to have. For jewelry, this will take more time to acquire as there is no set location for these items, meaning you have to rely on luck more. But for the amulet, I would recommend the Necklace of Swords or the Amulet of Axes, because both reflect 33% of damage and fortify 25 points to either blades or blunts. Now, unlike Skyrim, you are able to wear 2 rings, and the 2 rings I would recommend are the Mundane Ring, which reflects 35% of magic spells and resists 50% of magic in general, and the Sorcerer's Ring, which absorbs 25% of spells and fortifies magic by 25 points. These 3 pieces of jewelry are incredibly powerful and will make the Divine Crusader much more, well, divine. Now, for spells, we aren't going to be casting incredibly powerful spells that will be one-shotting enemies, though that is certainly possible. When it comes to destruction, I would recommend casting flame and lightning spells you either find from spell tomes or purchase from Mage Guild vendors. When you either acquire Frostcrag Spire or access into the Arcane University, you will be able to access the spell-making altar and create your own spells. When crafting spells, I believe the best that would work thematically is a touch spell that does fire and lightning damage, symbolically showing that the Divine Crusader is a furious storm or something to that effect. Besides, combining 2 damage effects statistically makes the spell do more damage for a lower cost, and is better than having one single effect do high damage. For Restoration, you will want to do the same, rely on using spells you find or purchase, and then make your own at the spell-making altar. The goal here will be to try to balance the cost between destruction spells and restoration spells, so neither take up too much of your magicka pool. We aren't going to be having massive amounts of magicka, so it's safe to go as conservatively as possible when it comes to the cost. Now, to acquire both the Crusader weapons and armor, you will need to play through the Knights of the Nine DLC, which is already included with the Oblivion Remaster, so no additional purchases are necessary. To start the quest, you will want to speak to the Prophet in the city of Anvil, and afterwards visit one shrine to each of the 9 divines. Now, this process can be quite tedious, however, here is a map of all the shrine locations, and I will quickly show you the locations myself, starting from the city of Anvil and branching out. The first is the Shrine of Mara, located northeast of Anvil. The second is the Shrine of Akatosh, located east of Anvil. The third is the Shrine of Zenithar, located southwest of Kvatch. The fourth is the Shrine of Tiber Septim, located west of Skingrad. The fifth is the Shrine of Arkay, located southeast of Skingrad. The sixth is the Shrine of Kinnereth, located east of Skingrad. The seventh is the Shrine of Dibella, located southwest of the Imperial City waterfront. The eighth is the Shrine of Julianos, located northwest of the Imperial City and the Chestnut Handy Stables. The ninth and last shrine is located east of the Imperial City and south of the Imperial City prison sewer gate we first emerge from. After you visit each of these shrines, the story and quest lines proceed normally, and you will want to slowly acquire each piece of armor after performing quests and completing various deeds. But I'll let you discover those for yourself. Now I think it is high time that we delve into the backstory and role-playing of the Divine Crusader so that we can get a good idea of who he is and what his ultimate goals are. The Divine Crusader was born in the City of Solitude, the capital of Skyrim, a place where imperial culture and mythology thrived. His parents were both priests at the Temple of the 9 Divines who spent their whole lives praying and preaching the 8 and 1. When his mother gave birth to him, he emerged with locks of long white hair turned brown as it was stained in the blood of his mother's womb. Just like Pelinal Whitestrake in the stories, whose white hair was stained in the blood of elves. His parents were unsure if his hair was meant to be a sign from the gods, a blessing, or even an omen. However, they decided to name him after the Star-Made Knight himself, and so he was given the name of Pelaf, Pelinal's name given Nordic form. Pelaf grew up studying the divines and memorizing their scriptures, and enjoyed hearing his parents preaching. He especially enjoyed accompanying them when they journeyed to the other cities of Skyrim as missionaries, to spread the word of the Nine to the heathen Nords that clung to the old ways. Preaching and traveling. It was the two things that Pelaf enjoyed, but as he grew up, he became bigger than all of the other kids in the city. And so he began to enjoy hitting things too, especially hitting dummies and sparring with blades and maces outside in the courtyard. Pelaf loved his parents and loved his city, yet he dreamed of wandering out into the world and fighting for various causes. Just like Pelinal Whitestrake himself before he took to the cause of Saint Alicia. His parents were not as enthusiastic about his wanderlust, as they wanted him to remain close by in the city or venture out as a priest, not a warrior. His parents felt that Pelaf had the markings of a saint due to his growing likeness to the glorious knight, but they felt he would serve the gods better as a preacher rather than just another warrior. To be the saint that turned all of the Nords to the 9 divines. But also deep down, his parents were scared to lose their only child. When Pelaf turned 16, he made an ultimatum with his parents, where he would remain within the city and serve as a priest, but also serve as a member of the Solitude Guard. His parents begrudgingly agreed, and Pelaf served proudly, even going out of his way to help citizens in need, journeying by himself to various bandit camps and slaughtering all that face him, retrieving stolen items and dramatically decreasing bandit raids for a time. Pelaf was able to rise through the ranks and even become captain of the guard at the age of 20, the youngest to ever reach such an esteemed position. He became a town hero and everyone respected him, as both a preacher and a protector, but Pelaf still felt as if he was asleep, only dreaming. Every day he had to fight his wanderlust and urge to abandon his post and leave the city for greener pastures. A few years later, Pelaf met a group of Colovian mercenaries called the Red Rivers that came to Solitude to celebrate a victory against a tribe of heathen reachmen known as the Rageclaw Clan. These mercenaries told stories of how they spilled their enemy's blood and used that blood to paint red rubies into the ground to honor their emperor gods like Riemann and Tiber Septim. They also gave the most fascinating descriptions of faraway lands, deserts filled with cat people, and volcanic islands covered in ash. Pelaf was enthralled with their stories and desired to join the Red Rivers on their next missions and adventures. And so he did. Pelaf left a note to his parents and abandoned his post as guard captain to leave Solitude and live a life as a traveling mercenary. Pelaf relished his time as a wandering mercenary of the Red Rivers and fought like a wild hound that enjoyed the taste of blood. It was during this time that Pelaf became known as Pelaf the White because of his pure white hair. From Morrowind to Hammerfell, Pelaf made his mark on the world in strokes of blood alongside his mercenary comrades, who loved and began to worship him as a sword saint. Pelaf also became close with one of the mercenaries, a Colovian named Romov. Pelaf felt happiness and joy when he was around Romov, and the two were always back to back when drawing swords and shedding blood. They became inseparable. This friendship eventually blossomed into love, and the two would often share a tent every night and love well. Things took a turn for the worse when the Red Rivers came to Hafengar to slaughter a group of Nord rebels fighting against the Empire, who made their home in Fort Haragstad, the fort west of Solitude, which did make Pelaf admittedly a little nervous. The Red Rivers were expecting a normal siege and believed the rebels were solely axe-wielding peasants fed up with paying taxes. However, when the Red Rivers attempted to break down the gates to the fort, they were set upon by battle mages who began raining fireball spells upon them. Pelaf was able to survive the initial barrage and found cover. He looked and saw Romov rallying the rest of the Red Rivers. But before Pelaf could even blink, he saw Romov catch a fireball and explode into ash. Pelaf had just seen the love of his life perish before him, and he felt a deep rage in his heart, begging to be released. And he did so without hesitation. Pelaf let out a terrifying scream and charged the gates, shattering them in a single blow, and began slaughtering the rebels, all while shouting out the name of his love, Romov. The Red Rivers rallied with Pelaf and fought off the rebels, but there were simply so many of them. After what felt like days of fighting, the rage inside Pelaf had faded, and what was left was the bodies of friends and foe alike. Pelaf was the only survivor. Pelaf mourned his love and buried his comrades, and walked to the nearest city for aid, which just so happened to be his home of solitude, the home he had abandoned years ago. When Pelaf entered the city, he was greeted not by friends, but instead Imperial guards who arrested him on the spot for desertion. Pelaf was too weak and dazed from the fighting and the mourning, and so he did not resist and surrendered quietly. He never even got the chance to speak to his parents again. Pelaf was sentenced and sent to Cyrodiil to be imprisoned, and you know the rest. When the Divine Crusader arrives at the Imperial City prisons and is placed within his cell, he will still be grieving the loss of his love and comrades, and also feel guilty as well. He felt that he had abandoned the Nine and his duties as a guardsman and priest due to his vanity and ego, and believed that the loss of Romov was his punishment, and now all he could do was seek atonement for his sins. But little did he know, the Emperor Uriel Septim would come through his cell, and he would be granted the redemption he seeks. Now, when we exit the sewers, we will want to proceed with the main quest until we bring Martin Septim to Cloud Ruler Temple. Afterwards, I recommend beginning the Knights of the Nine quest line. We will want to do this quest as soon as possible so we can get our thematic armor and weapons very quickly. Now, it should be stated that the Knights of the Nine armor is leveled. However, there is a way to have the armor and weapons level alongside you, which I will cover in the leveling section of this video. Once you have done that, the world is pretty much your oyster, and you should do as many quests and deeds as you can that help the common folk. Oh, and also fight back against the Mythic Dawn and some pesky Daedric prince named Mehrunes Dagon. When it comes to factions, you will definitely want to join both the Fighters Guild and Mages Guild, and rise through the ranks to become the leaders of these guilds. Not only was Pelaf great at rising through the ranks of the Solitude Guard and the Red Rivers, but Pelinal Whitestrake, the original Divine Crusader, was known for regularly conquering lands and ruling them as king, only to abandon them and move on to the next. You should view joining these guilds as conquering them and abandoning them just to move on to the next. Joining the Imperial City Arena and fighting as a gladiator is also great so that you can prove yourself to the people as the next Divine Crusader and relish in the bloodshed as Pelinal once did. I would recommend choosing the title of Divine Avenger before slaying the Grand Champion. I also recommend avoiding Agronach's quest, as completing it will lead to him not fighting you and wishing to die, making the final fight in the arena quite anticlimactic. There are various other minor factions that you can join, like the Knights of the White Stallion and the Blades, which you should join as well, just so you can abandon them later. Getting membership in these factions will just be adding another notch to the Divine Crusader's belt. Now, Pelinal Whitestrake was insane and mad, there is no question about that. So, doing the Shivering Isles DLC and becoming the Mad God himself is actually far more fitting to the theme of this build than you might believe. I believe rising as the Duke of Mania would be more fitting, especially since Pelinal was basically a homicidal maniac. Becoming the Mad God and ruling as its king, just to abandon it and go back to Tamriel crusading away, is a very fitting moment. Now, I have neglected mentioning the Thieves Guild and Dark Brotherhood. This is because if you play through these quest lines, you will lose your ability to wear the Divine Crusader armor, so normally I would say to avoid these factions as much as possible. However, if you have access to the highest tier of Madness armor, you could put aside the identity of the Divine Crusader and become a Crusader of Madness, going through a state of apathy and dark homicidal rage. The Thieves Guild works better than you might think because one of the names, or titles, attributed with Pelinal is Hans the Fox. Foxes are symbolically seen as tricksters and thieves, and the fox is an animal that has close ties to Shor, or Lorcan the Missing God, who has ties to Pelinal, as Pelinal is very likely the Shezarene, or divine incarnation of Lorcan, also known as Shazar in the Imperial Pantheon. Now, the Dark Brotherhood is probably the least fitting, but the Dark Brotherhood is all about murder and bloodletting, so in a fit of madness, the Divine Crusader may relish in the murder. When it comes to the Daedra quests, completing many of them would be completely fine, as you could see acquiring these artifacts as liberating them for the Divines. However, you will absolutely want to avoid doing Meridia's quest as she was an important figure among the Aelids, and the Divine Crusader would rather spit on her statue. When traversing the land, you are basically the Tamrielic version of the Punisher. Peace is never an option, and you should always go for the most violent route and slay the enemies of Cyrodiil and her empire. If you do anything that is not aligned with the 9 Divines and gain infamy, we can easily just use the Fit of Madness excuse at pretty much any point. So we can pretty much just do every single quest as this character, which I think is great since this type of build is very beginner friendly, at least mechanically it is. The further you get into the game and the more powerful you become, the more you will start to believe that you are the Shezarene, Pelinal incarnate, a god sent to defend his empire. Now for the leveling. Thanks to the Oblivion Remaster, the old archaic leveling system of Oblivion has been redone and replaced with one that I find to be way better, allowing for more player freedom. Because of this, we have a lot more freedom in how we level our attributes. We will want to focus on maxing out strength and endurance as quickly as possible, as both stats work hand in hand and turn us into an absolute powerhouse, making the Divine Crusader a tank that can never be killed and being able to deal massive damage. Once those stats are raised to 100, you should be around level 10, and then you will want to start raising both agility and willpower. Agility will be necessary to avoid being staggered by enemies, which will start happening more frequently at higher levels, and willpower is useful for increasing our stamina as well as magicka rate. When adding attributes, we add 5 points to 2 attributes and 2 points to a third. I would highly recommend adding those extra 2 points to intelligence so that we can slowly have more and more magicka to cast higher level spells later in the game. Remember, the Divine Crusader is a sword and board warrior first and a spellcaster second, so building our magicka pool should be seen more as an afterthought. After about level 20, you should start going all in on intelligence and then using what remains on speed and personality. Speed and personality will not be super important for this character, because in the Oblivion Remaster we are able to move much more faster anyways, and the newly added sprint mechanic makes us go quicker. And personality just increases our default disposition with NPCs and creatures, and since we will be joining various factions and raising our fame, people are gonna like us anyways. Besides, using the Speechcraft minigame is super easy, so if we really need someone to love us, we can just use that. Now, when it comes to having the Divine Crusader equipment level alongside us, we can easily hang it up on a podium in the Priory of the Nine. When we hang up the armor and pick it back up, not only will the armor be the same level as us and give the armor rating and enchantment to show it, but the armor will also be fully repaired and the weapons will be fully charged. This does make the armorer skill a bit redundant, but maxing out armor will be nice so we don't have to keep going to the Priory House after every single excursion. Besides, maxing armor and having our equipment reach 125% effectiveness just makes us even stronger. And that is the Divine Crusader, a beginner's build for people new to the Elder Scrolls, but mainly sky babies that know about Elder Scrolls lore like Pelennor, but have never actually played Oblivion before. Trust me, I was in the same boat and played a very similar build years ago. I hope you enjoyed the video and found it to be very informative. And I apologize for this video being a tad bit late, but do not fear, more Oblivion-themed videos will be coming. And a quick shout out to my channel members, because without them, I wouldn't have my Canis Root Tea budget. And they are... Mirak, Sovdark, Connorunda, Will Ernst, The Proud Prince, Skooma Addict, JJ Ensid, Grud, Luis Eduardo, Dova 2023, Josh McDonald, Milani Stilla, Abdullah the Goat, Luxie, Batman Man, David Correa, Ranger McKay, Dalton Rupert, I Love House Halalu, Kirill Gaming, and Carson Friday. Lastly, a big thank you to Bethesda for giving me a free copy of the game so I didn't have to spend $50. I was gonna buy the game no matter what, so it was really nice that they did that. So with all that being said, make sure to like the like button, like the subscribe button, and like the bell notification down below to be updated on future videos. And I will see you whenever the fuck I decide to upload again. House Telvanni be with you.
I suppose you want to be asked nicely. Very well. Please, O hero of Skyrim, I shall be ever so grateful.